Alexander Pushkin, a passage out of the Bronze Horseman, a Petersburg tale. I like you, Peter's great creation, your stringent look, impressive span, Neva's granitic decoration, the river's dignified run. Люблю тебя, Петра творенье, люблю твой строгий, стройный вид, Невы державное течение, береговой ее гранит. Hello, dear friends. I welcome you all to the channel, my channel. Today I want to talk about Russia, and Russia from the side that very few people knew about and even thought about. The topic came to me very unexpectedly because last week was a week of the Russian language. United Nations actually designated a day that all around the world the Russian language is being celebrated on the 6th of June. And why is it so important? Because the Russian language is one of the 6 official languages of the United Nations. Because of the Russian language that had such a big cultural impact on the world culture, and that's why United Nations decided to designate a special day in year to celebrate the Russian language. Why is it June 6th? Because it's the birthday of Alexander Pushkin. Alexander Pushkin, Alexander Sergeyevich Pushkin, is the greatest Russian poet, and he is the poet number one, and everyone knows him. And I'm sure that you also heard that name. And here on my channel, we've talked about Alexander Pushkin on a few occasions. I even recited a fairy tale written by Alexander Pushkin during one of our streams. Well, when I started thinking about that birthday and the Russian language day, I thought, oh my God, since my channel kind of right now demystifying Russia or bringing to light the sides of Russia that are lesser known or people actually not aware of. And one of the facts of Russia that is very little known but shows Russia in a very good way, it's if we talk about ancestry of Alexander Pushkin. And Alexander Pushkin has a great grandfather, and that great grandfather, he is of African origin, and actually two modern countries, Ethiopia and Eritrea, they claim being the birthplace of Alexander Pushkin, the famous, the most loved, the poet number one of Russia, the Russian poet, the most famous Russian poet. So why is it Ethiopia and Eritrea, those countries, what do they have to do with Alexander Pushkin? You know, they even erected monument for Alexander Pushkin in both countries, and if Ethiopia and Eritrea, they both have now the monuments of Alexander Pushkin, and they have the streets in their capital cities named after Pushkin. Disputing Eritrea, Ethiopia requests a statue of Pushkin from Russia. What is so special? Well, because the great-grandfather of Alexander Pushkin was born in Africa, and he was of the African origin, and he was black. Yes, Alexander Pushkin had his great-grandfather from Africa. How did it happen? It's a fascinating story. It's really a very, very interesting story. So the name of his great-grandfather was Abram Hannibal. Abram Hannibal, and actually since he had a patronymic later in his life, and I'll come back to that. So he was born at the end of the 17th century, around 1698 in Africa, and the Ottoman Empire back then had possession of those territories, and the Turks decided to replenish their population with the captives from those territories, and they enslaved population, and they brought some people to Istanbul, to Constantinople, and one among those mm, among those people who were captured was this boy, and he was brought to Constantinople. And back then, actually, the courts, the European courts, it was kind of fashionable to have little boys, little pages, black boys as the, I don't know, the monarch's toys or something like that. It was popular. It was really popular, fashionable, expensive toy, and sometimes those type of gifts were brought from Africa to the European courts. And while traveling to Constantinople on business, the Russian ambassador Sava Raguzinsky, he was in Constantinople, and he saw this boy, and he decided to bring him as the present to Peter the Great. Peter the Great was the Tsar back then in Russia, and first he saw this boy, and that boy was given to him as a bribe, and Sava brought this boy to St. Petersburg and presented this boy at the court and to Peter the Great. Peter the Great saw the boy, and the boy was very active, very bright, and very smart. And the year later, Peter the Great decided to baptize him into the Russian Orthodox faith. And since he was his godfather, he got a patronymic name, and he became Abram Petrovich. Abram Petrovich, and everyone knew that he was Peter the Great's godson, and that's why the attitude toward that boy was, okay, he is the Tsar's favorite boy, he is the Tsar's protege, he is the Tsar's godson, means we don't care what color he is Christian, he is Russian Orthodox, and now he is one of us. And beyond that, I kid you not, no one even noticed that he was different color, that his skin was different color. No one ever mentioned anything, and they didn't look at him differently. And that's why he was growing up at the court, at the palaces, together with other Russian nobility. And when he turned 17, Peter the Great sent him to Europe to receive education. He was educated at the military academy in France. And during his education there, he communicated with the Baron de Montesquieu, with Voltaire, and Voltaire called him the dark star of the Enlightenment era. And it was so interesting, so wonderful. Then there briefly was the war between France and Spain, and that's during that war he was already military cadet, and he enlisted with the French army, and he fought Spanish army on the side of French army. And during that time he adopted the last name Gannibal or Hannibal after the Carthaginian general Hannibal. In Russian transcription it pronounced Gannibal, and that's how he became Abram Petrovich Gannibal. Abram Petrovich Gannibal. He was taken into captivity by Spaniards. He spent few years over there, and then when the war was over, he was returned to France, and then he came back to Russia, and he continued his service there. He became the general of artillery. He was serving he was very loyal to his godfather, Peter the Great. And when Peter the Great died in 1725, The other favorite of Peter the Great, Menshikov, he didn't like Gannibal, and he kind of exiled him all the way to Siberia because he didn't want a rival that strong and that smart to him. Because both Menshikov and Gannibal, they were not nobility by birth, they were by merit. And Menshikov actually reached very high in ranks in Russian society and Russian courts. He almost became a regent at the court because the daughter of Peter the Great, she wasn't of age yet, and he was kind of regent sitting, waiting for her, saying that I'm going to rule Russia. Um, and that's why, and the other not the noble person, Gannibal, who was not no, who was noble but not by birth, they had that rivalry because he had his character, infamous character. So he exiled this Gannibal all the way to Siberia, and he even was in my native town of Irkutsk for a few years. And then Menshikov ended up being ousted, and daughter of Peter the Great came to power, and she really adored and admired Gannibal. She sent for him, and he came back to St. Petersburg and continued to serve to the Russian throne faithfully till the very end. And he was wealthy, he was very highly regarded in the Russian society. And again, I'm telling you that no one thought twice that he wasn't of that uh, color of his skin. He was married twice. First marriage wasn't that successful. He didn't like his wife. She was Greek by origin, and he had one child with her. But the second one, she was German by origin, but she lived in Russia, and they had 10 children. So altogether, he had 11 children, and they all did career. They all did extremely well in Russia. All his family, his oldest son, Ivan, um, achieved high rank in the Russian military, and the rest of the children also, they did very well. They all achieved the status of nobility. They got, I mean, they were given, well, um because Abram Petrovich Gannibal, he was noble, and they all inherited his noble title, and they all were accepted in the Russian society. I mean, they were part of the noble Russian society. So his and among of his sons there was one. His name was Osip, and Osip, when he married, he gave birth. He had a daughter named Nadezhda Osipovna, and Nadezhda Osipovna became a mother of Alexander Pushkin. So that's how it was. Alexander Pushkin has a quarter of his blood from Ethiopia. So who could have thought? And yes, look at Pushkin. Here's his picture, and you can see that. I mean, if you never thought that part of Pushkin's biography, that's how he is. But what is the most remarkable thing about this story is, again, that Russia embraces diversity and accepts everyone who comes to Russia, who loves Russia, and becomes Russian, and Russia says, hey, you are Russian. Back then, it was more important if you accepted Orthodoxy, then you are Russian. And Russia had so many examples when people from different faiths and religions, they took the Russian Orthodoxy. And actually, Catherine the Great, she also was baptized into Orthodoxy, and all those wives of the Russian emperors also, they were baptized from different faiths, and they served to the throne and to the country. And the story that I wanted to tell you was about Abram Gannibal, the Ethiopian or Eritrean boy who was enslaved and who found freedom, fame, and home there in Russia. And that was a fascinating story. And I believe that stories like that should be known about Russia, so people would know that Russia is a country that you are not supposed to be afraid of. The stories like this should be known, and then more people would be open to learn more and more about Russia. That was our story for today, and I'm wishing you all a wonderful day. Please come back to the channel. And if you want to learn Russian, there are plenty of videos to learn Russian also on the channel. And if you want to learn more about Russia as a country, please ask questions, write comments. I would be more than happy to read everything. Subscribe to the channel. I am so happy to see you all here, and I'll talk to you very, very soon.